What's good? What's good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Urban Platform Speaks. Make sure to like and subscribe as you tune into the channel and check out the content. And with that being said, man, I wanna I wanna talk about Stephen A. Smith and him his apology to Kyrie Irving after 5 years, right? And he decided to go into his podcast and apologize to Kyrie Irving, which, in my opinion, I think it's too little, too late. And then on top of that, I don't even really think that his apology is a genuine apology. I think that Stephen A. Smith knew what he was doing all along was malicious. You know, when you make an innocent mistake and you apologize, that's one thing, and I think a lot of times people will forgive you when you make an innocent mistake, you come back and you say, oh man, I apologize. But even at the time that Stephen A. Smith was making these statements about about Kyrie Irving not wanting to take that vaccine, I think that he knew like what the possible ramifications could be for Kyrie Irving on one hand, and then on the other hand, he was promoting and touting something that was really unproven, that people would, a lot of people was not sure if they wanted to take that vaccine, right? But he still, was he was touting and pushing for people to get it, right? So now on the Jason Whitlock show today, or not today, but recently they spoke about this. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play the audio, right? And I'm going to come back and give my input because I think Jason Whitlock and his panel made some interesting points. And I want to comment also on some things that about Stephen A. Smith, because he kind of exposed himself in certain ways with his apology to Kyrie Irving.
uh, Stephen A. Smith apologized to Kyrie Irving yesterday for the way he talked about Kyrie during COVID and for Kyrie not wanting to take the shot and not taking the shot. Let's play the clip.
When it comes to Kyrie Irving, I can't apologize strongly enough. I didn't want to take the vaccine, but I took it. Millions of other people didn't want to take the vaccine, but we took it. Why? Because there was a mandate that was handed down. And if we weren't willing to meet that mandate, our jobs, our livelihoods, if not compromised in a very significant way, would be completely stripped from us. But there were others who had the courage to say, bump that. And one of those people at the forefront was Kyrie Irving.
All right, so my first point. All right, so Kyrie Irving had the courage to say, no, I'm not going to take this, this vaccine, right? Stephen A. Smith, so he's admitting that he did not have the courage, right? But Stephen A. Smith vilified Kyrie Irving for having the courage, right or wrong. You know what I mean? The situation may have turned out it could have turned out the other way. Well, maybe the taking the vaccine was the right thing to do, right? So I'm not judging people who took it, and I'm not judging people who chose not to take the vaccine, right? I'm just saying, but what's important here is that Kyrie Irving was brave enough, willing to risk everything to stand on his convictions. And then so later on, he would have dealt with the consequences if he was wrong, right? But Stephen A. Smith didn't do that. He didn't, he just was thinking about his job. He put his job, the amount of money he was going to make on his job ahead of his his life, basically, because this thing could, it could be life changing or altering, or even it could end your life if you're making a wrong decision, right? So, but he went against what he probably thought was the thing to do. He didn't have any courage. So I think that right, that's evident, from Stephen A. Smith not having courage. But let me continue with this the audio.
I bring his name up because I had my issues. with him from a leadership standpoint, never as a player, because he's sensational. But with him, in terms of leadership.
Now, how can Stephen A. Smith have issues with Kyrie as a leader? You know, he stood on his own morals and principles. So again, like what leadership are you talking about? You know,
and I didn't look at it as being courageous. I looked at it as being selfish. And I watched Dr. Fauci on Capitol Hill yesterday. And the person I thought about most was Kyrie Irving.
The Stephen A. Smith.
Wait a minute. All right, let me just say this. All right. You know, like I said, when you talking about something as serious as that was, and then on top of that, anybody with any sense knew that they were trying at that time, they were trying to rush this vaccine along, right? Usually when you know, like when they're doing vaccines and stuff like that, you know, there's like a long trial period, test period and stuff like that. You talking about now, they was trying to expedite this situation weeks, months, you know, where sometimes it takes a medicine or a vaccine years to get approved by the government. But now all of a sudden they coming out with something untested, unproven, and they want to put it out there to the masses. And that's what the problem with a lot of people. They was like, well, you know, we're not sure about this, man. You know, like you what's going to be the side effects? What's going to be, if you had any questions, and the questions that you have about this, usually it take years to find out, like, what are the side effects? You know, how serious are the side effects? Is this thing, you know, can it really work? Is you know, a lot of things that they, you know, and they try to expedite it. And so some people was like, no, I'm not going to be a guinea pig, you know, for this situation. So, and Stephen A. Smith knew, and so he can't really, you know, come back and try to apologize after the damage has been done, after you put this man's livelihood and his job at risk.
Deserve credit for this apology, which is what, 3 or 4 years later. I say no. I say hell no. I say Stephen A. goes whichever way the wind blows. I just, no dice here. Maurice, you give Stephen A. any credit here?
I give anybody credit who, you know, even if it takes longer than it should, who has the wherewithal to actually get on a camera and apologize. Getting on camera and apologizing for a lot of people is really difficult. Admitting when you're wrong is difficult for a lot of people. So I'll give him credit for that. Better late than never.
This is never.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes you have people who are convicted for crimes that they didn't commit, or and even worse cases, you might have a person who was framed and set up for a situation, and the prosecutor had information that could have, and this is not uncommon. Like the prosecutor had information that could help prove the person's innocence, right? But you know, and that person go to prison, but then, you know, they discover years down the line that this person was innocent. And so you can't come back later on and say, well, I made a big mistake. You know, I used poor judgment. You know, if somebody in jail for years, you know, and you taking away from people, you know, their livelihoods, and you're affecting their family. To me, I just think that, you know, an apology, and even you know, sometimes they try to pay people off in the long run, but you can't give people that time back, man, or that you just can't.
4 years after the fact, Fauci just made a fool of himself in front of the Senate. Everybody's running around vaccine injured. Stephen A. barely graduated high school, and he's out here talking about a vaccine. This was not a hard thing. This wasn't a hard decision to make as a broadcaster to stay out of this. People spoke out against Kyrie Irving, spoke out against Aaron Rodgers because their bosses told them to.
And that's another good point, right? Stephen A. Smith is not somebody who's qualified to speak on this topic in a knowledgeable way, right? So the decision to, like I said, to either to take it or not to take it is going to be a personal decision. Then on top of that, you know, Stephen A. Smith, he's on a sports show. So why is he even chiming in from a sports show? His expertise is talking about basketball and baseball and football, and he's chiming in, you know, on medical topics. He was way off. He was way out of his lane on this one.
And while they run around pretending to be rebels, and I'm an outspoken person for the black community. No, you're a coward and you do whatever your bosses tell you. Dre, does he deserve any credit?
He deserves a debit. That's the opposite of a credit for what he just did. Because, first of all, while that whole situation was happening with the virus, Stephen A. is correct in that people in New York City could not work if they didn't have the jab. And we're not even going to call it a vaccine. They changed the definition of the word so people who took it could save face. That's a different conversation. He and Mike Wilbon, most prominently talking basketball, they went in really a lot on Kyrie Irving because he wasn't taking that jab. And that's what everybody was doing at that time, because everybody was saying, well, you got to take the jab, then we can be free again. We can go outside again. We won't kill grandma anymore. Everybody can go back to their lives if everyone else would just take the jab. And Kyrie was one of the most outspoken and prominent people who was saying, I'm not going to take the jab. Everybody was saying it, though. So it didn't take any courage for Stephen A. to say it back then. And now this week, who's everybody bashing? Dr. Anthony Fauci. He goes on Capitol Hill. He pleads the fifth 111 times. Everybody's bashing Dr. Anthony Fauci. Bashing Fauci right now is like bashing Donald Trump in 2020 on Twitter. It takes no courage. Everybody else is doing it. You're saying the same thing that everybody else is saying. Now he's coming out and he's using Dr. Fauci as a scapegoat here. He's using him as an excuse for why all of a sudden Stephen A. Smith has come to his senses in 2026 after the jab came out in 2020. Now he just now, 6 years later, because of what he saw from Dr. Fauci, which is literally nothing, because Dr. Fauci said nothing. Now Stephen A. Smith has figured out from all the things said about Dr. Fauci that, oh, I must have been wrong about Kyrie Irving. No, he is just picking on the low-hanging fruit. It is easy to bash Dr. Fauci right now. He can draw some attention to himself. Of course, Stephen A. is dabbling in the political waters, whatever it is that he's trying to do. He plays both sides of the fence, depending on the day of the week, the left side or the right side. I guess this is a little bit leaning towards the right by bashing Dr. Fauci and apologizing to Kyrie Irving. But he deserves absolutely no credit for this. He deserves the opposite of credit, which is a debit for this. He is just following the winds and doing what is popular right now.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, Stephen A. Smith, in my opinion, he knew from the very beginning. This is not an innocent mistake on his part. You know, he didn't care how this would affect, you know, Kyrie Irving's his life. As a matter of fact, he was calling for Kyrie Irving to, you know, to lose his job. You know, you know, they toss him out of the NBA. He felt, I don't know if he felt that strongly about it, but he said that Kyrie Irving should be kicked out of the NBA, you know. And so, yeah, you just can't come on your podcast 5 or 6 years later and say, I was wrong because of what he don't even know this guy, Dr. Fauci, you know. And so it's crazy, man. And he just exposed himself, in my opinion, as someone who don't have any courage or any conviction to stand on anything. And I can't think of one issue where Stephen A. Smith put his foot down and said, you know, I'm really willing to risk everything because this is what I believe in. You know, yeah. And people know, the good thing about this is people know this about Stephen A. Smith. So he's not really fooling anybody. So that's my take on it. Make sure to like and subscribe. Also, don't forget to leave a comment, and I'm going to check y'all out in the next video. Peace.